everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We want to give a few minutes for folks as they come into the webinar, but we will be starting shortly. Okay, well, why don't we get started with introductions, and I will kick us off. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm Christine Tao. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Sounding Board. We are a startup that is democratizing access to leadership coaching to some of the world's largest organizations, such as Bloomberg, Mozilla, and Rakuten. I started the company because of a passion for leadership development. And so, this topic that we have today is really near and dear to my heart because we work with a lot of folks that are leading people functions and have been through an incredible time, as you can imagine, over the last few months. And so the webinar today is talking about top HR strategies for balancing the needs of remote workers. And I have two guests that I am so excited for you to hear from. The first is Renee Caspar. She's the Chief People Officer at Octane. She's got over 25 years of experience at companies that you probably have heard of, including GE, eBay, Amazon, Fidelity, and Thomson Reuters. And she's a thought leader in her space, really known for a sort of solution-based approach to complex people scenarios. And I will let both of our speakers introduce themselves as well. So Renee, can you introduce a little bit about yourself and your background?
Oh, it's hard to do more than that, so thank you. Yeah, so as Christine shared, I've been in HR for about 25 years. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing sometimes from the perspective of how fast things are changing and having to be mindful of all the changes. But I've had a great journey. I've had a lot of fun, a lot of great mentors, and learned a lot along the way. And I hope that the things that I can share today will be helpful to those out there. I do attend these seminars as well. And every one of them, I pick up something insightful and helpful for me to journey up with my practice at the organization I'm with. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Dr. Sohee Jung. Sohee Jung is a leadership coach, and she's also the best-selling author of a book called Mommy Tracked: How to Take Authentic Risks and Find Success on Your Own Terms, which I heard just before is apparently #1 in her category on Amazon. So I'm so excited to have you here. In addition to your work as a coach, you've also had an extensive experience in, I believe, media in the organization and HR side. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Thank you. My gosh, I never tire of hearing the word doctor.
I feel like if you've worked that hard to get the title, you should use it everywhere you can.
It's true. I make my kids say it. So I am a leadership coach and a leadership development expert, and I've been doing this for 20 years, working with some really great companies as well. So I've had the honor of doing that. And, as Renee said, the space is changing so quickly. And I think it's really interesting times. So I'm so excited to be here with all of you and to be with all of the participants. It's going to be fun.
Great. Well, just a couple of logistics before we get going into the meat of the webinar. What we will do today is really try and make this interactive and make this relevant. So what you'll start to see as we go through the webinar is that there will be a series of polls and questions that come up as we're talking. And that's really for us to get a sense of what do you want to hear out there as part of the audience? What are the things that our panelists are saying that's resonating with you? And then, of course, any questions that are arising. We'll do our best to incorporate that into the flow of the conversation, but also know we will have a dedicated time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if we don't get to your question, it doesn't mean we haven't seen it, just means that we might be sort of pushing that to the end where we can really give it the time it deserves. And other than that, let's just get started. I think, we're here today to really talk about the needs of remote workers, but I thought it would just be helpful for us to take a step back and just name what those needs actually are. I think there's been a lot of, media and press talking about working parents or folks that are isolating alone. But Renee, I was really struck in our discussion beforehand on this insight that you had on even just understanding what those needs are, and would love to have you kick us off and tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. So, basically, we all hear this. We're reading the Wall Street Journal, we're reading our HR magazines, we're reading the New York Times, and we're getting an understanding. We're probably attending these seminars. We're getting an understanding of what is out there. And what I shared with Christine before the session is that it may not always apply to your organization. And the key to all of this is figuring out who you are and what your needs are. And so, after attending something I want to say in June, I reached out to my senior team and we looked at all of the different facets, from loneliness to mental health to parenting and childcare simultaneously while working, people concerned with their own health. So we started to look at all of these various aspects and the confluence of things that were piling on people. And we said, well, we don't know what the reality is for our people and what they're really experiencing. So we had done a COVID survey at the beginning, and we said, well, let's do a COVID survey 2 and really kind of understand, now that we're in this for the long haul, because we're not going back right now until next year. Now that we're in this for the long haul, what are we to really focus on? Before, early on, it was the urgency of getting people their equipment and their office set up, and making sure community was together and getting their Zoom set up, and and it was all spontaneous and acute, and we had to do it quickly. Now it's okay, we're here. How do we do this to really engage our population? And engagement was the number one thing, right? If we don't have them engaged, they're not productive. If they're not productive, it impacts the organization. And it's all of those things that we're putting together. So we did a survey, and it was an astounding find for me, because my expectation was that the parenting needs were going to surge to the top, because that's all you hear about in media, right? And it wasn't for our organization. And I had to take a step back. For us, the number one worry, and we gave a list of all the things that people could be worried about and said, let us know, and at what level are you worried? And the number one thing that came back is catching COVID, the number one thing. The number 2 was their physical well-being through this. The number 3 was financial concerns. And number 4 was emotional health. And number 5 was childcare. So that was astounding. And it was only about 20% of the people that were
small number. Did my phone go off? Because I got a little.
You're back. You're back.
Okay. Great. Okay. So basically, it was an astounding find, but it aligns with who we are. So we are a startup. 88% of my population is a millennial or a Generation Z. So this makes sense. But before we got Employee Voice, I might have traveled down the path of trying to solve for something that wasn't the true problem. And so now we're in the discussions of, well, what does this mean now, knowing that these are the things that people really need support with, and what are we going to tweak, refine, and make better? And so that's sort of, does that answer what you were asking, Christine? And that's really, I think, some profound work, and it's been insightful for me. It's been insightful. I have a committee of people that are working this work together. They helped draft the survey, because we wanted to democratize it. We wanted it to be of the people, for the people, and by the people of the company. So a group of people helped to put this together, and they're also helping understand how to navigate the solutions. And we could talk about the solutions later, but I don't want to over talk.
No,
Can I add, Christine?
Yes, of course.
Renee, that you went and did the survey, because being on the flip side, as owning my own firm and working with companies going through all of this stuff with COVID, that's one of the top strategies that I recommend, which is survey your people and make sure that you hear from them on their wants and needs, because it's evolving, and it's evolving so quickly that you don't want to do it just once. Do it, make it iterative, so that you're on the pulse and engaged with the people that, within the culture that you're in, which is very different from, company to company.
I think it's also especially relevant because, one of the other topics that have emerged during this time, or issues, has been around diversity and inclusion. And so the fact that when you took a time to take a step back and not just enact policies and procedures based on your own lived experiences, but really trying to understand what are the experiences of your employee base, I think is really important. One of the things we've seen at Sounding Board has been that there's just been such a disparate amount of needs across the organization, because of where people are you've got 4 generations of people in the workforce now. And so being able to manage across that, means that there's just lots of people at different life stages and needs that are in your workforce. I mean, I would love to hear, Sohi, from you, because you work with leaders that might also be not only making decisions on what some of these processes are, but also going through these very experiences themselves. What have you seen from your leaders that you coach, the organizations that you work with, around what some of these needs are?
Yeah, I think that that's a really great question. And what's coming top of mind and kind of with the clients that I'm working with right now is really around this thing called resiliency. So how do we build that capability within our leaders is top of mind, and why I get called in a lot. How do we do that for our leaders? Because right now it's challenging, right? Remote workforce. First of all, what does that look like for the company they're in? And then how do you lead within that? I remember somebody that I used to work with in the past said something really interesting but poignant, which is if you are a poor leader, face to face, it's going to be even more difficult when you go remote. And I think that's really true. So it's really shoring up the skills of leaders at all levels right now to be engaged and understanding what that means in a virtual environment, which is really difficult. It's a different beast from managing live and face to face. So that, but also, helping leaders think through, okay, what makes sense for my company? What makes sense for the context now, which could have been starting in COVID, middle, and kind of what space we're in now. So really helping them iterate and not get stuck on what was, right? So.
Yes. Well, that actually is a great lead up for our audience. We'd love to also hear from you. What are some of these needs that are emerging for you in your organizations? We'll have a poll that's starting and would love to hear what other things are rising for you. While that's happening, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the solutions or strategies that you're deploying, Renee. I'd love to hear, where are you in enacting these strategies, creating them or implementing them? And then how do you think about adjusting them along the way as you start to get more data back?
Right. And thank you. So it was interesting. I just want to piggyback on something so he said as well about helping managers. And one of the things that, or raising awareness of managers, helping the leaders lead. One of the things early on that we needed to do and we had to do was help managers learn how to manage people with children and children that were interrupting. And coincidentally, as I was thinking that, as so he was saying it, my daughter was flipping her hand through a door right now to let me know she was home. And so I heard a dog bark, far away.
Yeah.
And so it was really, I think I want to address that, and then I'll get into the to the other question that you had, is that it was helping make managers more aware of this. So I shared an example early on when we were talking about the panel that I had a situation where a manager who was a single dad was presenting to the senior team, and he has a 3-year-old, and it was a very serious topic in which he was presenting to us. And the little girl needed a gummy bear, and she desperately wanted a gummy bear, and there was no way she was going to relent. And the poor dad was doing everything to try to stay focused. And no one laughed or kind of helped him in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things was after that incident, I did reach out to managers that were on the call and said, it's stressful enough sometimes presenting and doing these things. This is another dimension that we need to be more mindful of. Yeah. And so it's educating your managers is a really big part of that. And though we have an agenda, we have to recognize where our people are at that moment, and they are doing their best at that moment. I know it's a little bit different than the question, but I wanted to share that story. And then we reached out to the individual himself and checked in, and do you need anything? Are you okay? And this was early on in COVID. And so again, I want to answer your question, and your question was, what are we doing? So working parents is not our biggest area of focus right now. Our biggest area right now is going to be COVID communications, which came out of our survey. It's been a lesson for us that are on the team, because we were really vigilant about communications right after everyone got sent home. We sent a weekly communication once a week. It was a fun communication. It had videos. It was filled with positivity as well as information around here's what's happening with the offices, here's what we're doing, here's a report, all of those kinds of things. And then we made a decision in June that we don't want to tweak this out. We want to give people a perspective of how long this is really going to be. Let's tell them we're not going to go back until January from where we're sitting now, as opposed to we're going to come back in 2 weeks, we're going to come back in 2 weeks, we're going to come back in 2 weeks. And so when we did that, we stopped communicating because we thought we had communicated the ultimate, right? You're not coming back until January. Therefore, we don't need to communicate anymore. We're done. And we learned through the hard way that no, you're not. People still want to hear that we're talking about it, that we're still thinking about it. And so that was a really big learning for us. And I want to share that with anybody out there. If you've slowed down your communication because you think you've given them the right information, rethink it. And that was again a big learning. So as a response to that, we're going to be restarting our weekly updates. We're going to have all hands announcements every 2 weeks. What are we doing? Where are we? Even if nothing has changed, people still want to know that nothing has changed. Yeah. One of the things I'm still ideating on and going to work with the CEO on is maybe a brief weekly reflection on the work, on the things that have happened, but to create more transparency, because again, we thought we did the work. We got a really great review on our first survey. We're good. So I don't know if that's helpful. So that's one of the things, and I'll stop now, but we have other things with work-life balance, health and wellness, financial wellness, and working parent ideas, but I'll wait until, there's the appropriate time for me to go into them if you'd like.
Well, I do see, our poll results actually show that, the top 3 concerns have been work-life balance. Second is communication, what you just talked about, Renee. And then the third is leadership, which he had already introduced. So it certainly seems as if what you're experiencing is also what others are experiencing. I'd be curious from you, Sophie, Renee was talking about surveying, and you've also talked about that as well. Have you seen, any sort of innovative or interesting ways that companies and their leaders are trying to sort of stay connected to their employees to understand what those needs are and how they're changing?
I think there's nothing better than old-fashioned just reaching out outside of surveys where you can get across, most people, if they participate in a survey, especially during times like this when we're told to stay socially distant, but somehow connect. There's really nothing better than reaching out and saying, hey, Renee, how are you doing? How's this going for you? I know you have a kid. Are we supporting you in the way that we need to? So really just having conversation. And I know that sounds simplistic in nature, but that is what's so powerful about this time and just so poignant, because we all feel it. We all feel kind of the void of having people around us. We're on this Zoom thing that some of us are experts in now, but it's really that. It's like, how can you as a leader reach out to your team to figure out, what their needs are during this time? And I love the poll results because that is so top of mind for the clients that I work with, which is all about this work-life balance. And I have a different way of looking at it that I can talk about.
Tell us a little bit about what that is. And, I do think that one takeaway I'm seeing from both of you is that there's something so powerful about just enabling people in those moments. And it's through, whether it was offering him a gummy bear or being able to just have that conversation. We certainly see that as well, that connection is more important than ever. I was looking at some stats, and you see stats that say, 60% of folks feel less connected to their colleagues than they did before COVID. 40% of them are experiencing mental health decline. At the same time, you also see 90% of people want to keep working remotely. So there is this dichotomy of, there are these benefits that are happening, but then there is that challenge of how do you balance that work life and your home life when it's all integrated. So yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Sophie, and, especially how you think differently about it.
Yeah, I think from a company perspective, it's really about how do you flex and kind of come up with creative solutions. And I know Renee can talk more about that, but it's looking at, the like iterating on the policies. So from a leader perspective and just people going through it, I'm going through it myself. I have 3 kids at home and I'm a single parent working, to try to distance learn and help my kids do that and run my own business. And the way that I look at all of this kind of work-life balance thing is to not even talk about it as balance, because guess what? It's just not possible. Let me just say that full stop. It's not possible. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we say, I'm trying to balance it all, because the connotation of that is that you have all the plates spinning in the air. And what I talk about in my book so passionately is that we have to look at it from a point of integration. And by that, I mean looking at what are those things that are top priorities right now. Is it, you know what, I got to make sure that my kid is on his Zoom and my kids are up and ready for school. And maybe I have to push back that meeting. So that's what's most pressing, what's most important. And I have to integrate that into my life. So it's really looking at, okay, how do I integrate, not balance? Balance means trying to do everything. Integrate is looking at what are your top priorities and how is that making its way into your work and home life, and really being clear about what those are, with not just your work and the people that lead you. So if you're an employee, really being communicative to your manager about these are my priorities and here's how I need your support. And on the flip side, if you're a leader, really reaching out and saying, how can we support you, because there's so much going on right now. What support do you need? And just asking that question alone is so powerful, because how many of us have been asked that question from a manager? What kind of support can I give you, right? Probably not a lot, sadly, but it is a really powerful way to just, make that connection and stay on the pulse of what your employees need, and just, try to get through this COVID thing with as much grace as possible. Grace, lower expectations, be communicative, and integrate, not balance.
I love that. Renee, I think, this might be a little bit, you have this purview of having to also enact the policies, but also leading your employees. So, as someone who's running the people function, how do you think about what those balances are? One, that the employee has to be vocal about what their needs are, but then where's the responsibility of the organization to create the right structure, the right systems to actually be able to support those needs?
I'm going to piggyback on what Sohi said. I think the responsibility of the organization is to really educate the managers, to help the managers help the employees. Policies are important, but I really think what it boils down to is how the individual managers are approaching each employee. We did talk to our managers early on. I think very early on, we put out a guide. I actually think I want to revisit that. How do you manage your employees, from helping them understand what your expectations are, knowing, and then working with what their priorities are, both in at work and outside of work, what Sohi said, but understanding what the expectations are for the role and what the needs are here. How do we help you achieve that? Setting expectations for hours. What do the hours look like? And then being flexible on that and understanding, there's childcare issue that might be happening, or an elderly care issue, because it's not just childcare, it's also elderly care that people are also managing. So it's teaching the managers to know how to flex, and it goes back to what Sohi said, and it really is that manager education process. And I would say that we've done a fairly good job at that. We had a question in our survey: is I feel supported by my managers at this time, and we had an 88% positive response rate, which is relatively good.
Okay.
Now that was early, right? As we get into the next phase, and there's prolonged remote schooling and things like this, resilience is going to be waning. And our company as a startup is zooming fast. So we have to keep checking in with these managers, and we have to keep helping them develop the skills of compassion, empathy, connection, while still simultaneously driving results, because you can't eliminate the fact that this is a job and the work has to get done, but you don't have to drive to a point where you lose those elements that enable people to feel valued and people to feel like they can. I like that work integration. I had heard that even before this, where they can integrate these pieces. And so I think it is about learning those skills. And right now, I'm in the process of doing a manager training program throughout the organization that is not COVID based, but it is about emotional intelligence. And in that emotional intelligence, a real key factor is turning empathy to compassion, because the other risk that can be had for managers that are evolving skill sets and balancing this all is that they can become drained with becoming over empathetic. So what we want to do is we want to take that empathy, build it into compassion, which is action based, which is, okay, what work schedule should I be putting you on? How does this work for you? What can I do to support you? Rather than, oh my gosh, I know how hard this is for you. Wow, I feel really bad for you. This is, it's taking it to that next step. So those are the things I think we can do. From a policy perspective, there's another thing that I do think we can look at, and these are things that we're starting to discuss. It's really looking at the Zoom meeting piece. The Zoom meeting, I think, is a tremendous amount of burnout, and it affects working parents and people that are taking care of the elderly because they always have to be visible. So it's putting policy in effect that helps that. That says, is Zoom necessary at this moment, or can you do it by telephone? Can it be a walking meeting rather than a face-to-face meeting like this? What are the things that we can do that unshackle people from this one desk that they sit at all day and being on the screen? So I think that that's a piece. And what we have also found is that meeting management is a huge issue as a result, because we're trying to connect. And so what is the meeting's intention? Are we doing meetings well? What can we do differently in our meetings? So I think it's a lot of pieces, things that we're thinking about or that will be proposed, or no meetings on Friday after 2, so people can wrap their day up and really figure out, or wrap their week up and be able to have that decompression time, particularly people that are in meetings all day. Maybe a lunch-free zone where nobody schedules meeting at lunchtime, so that people can attend to their needs during the day with their families. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. And it, again, from those policies, it really goes back to what I originally said, and I'll end with this. It's all about getting the managers to buy in and to be able to understand why it is a value to them and how to deploy it. So policies are one piece. The manager deployment of it and engagement with their employees is the most essential piece of all of this.
I love that you said that, Renee. I feel like we should join forces. Super
Right.
here.
That's right. And I think it's actually something a lot of organizations often miss, because it's kind of like you have policy and then you have implementation, deployment, and then how that actually touches that policy and process actually touches your employee. One last follow-up question for you, Renee, which is, you talked a lot about managers, but for your leaders, have you had to rethink, business priorities, and from the executive team, how you set the right priorities so you're creating, one, clear goals for the organization, but also recognizing that as an organization, you also have an employee base that has a lot going on outside of work. Is that something that's come up for you at all?
I think our leaders are, yes and no. I don't think that they've reset the priorities, but I think that they've put people as a priority. So it's not, and how does the people part integrate? And it's not just COVID, it's been the social injustice and the DEI movement. It's all of these. So I feel like they've continued with their business objectives and agendas, but these other pieces now have risen to a level of equal importance that they may have not had before. And they seem to be paying more attention to things that were seemingly inconsequential before all of this happened, because they recognize the need for people to be committed, for people to be in it with us. And what does that mean? And it means that we have to rethink how we're approaching the work, how we're interacting with our employee base, how we're recognizing the pains that they're going through. For example, when George Floyd, the unfortunate incident with George Floyd happened, we immediately responded. The CEO sent something out, and then we had an all hands meeting with the entire employee base to talk about their personal experiences. And it was called a moment of understanding. And it was a listening session for all of us to really be able to tap in to understanding our Black and Brown colleagues and what their life is like. And so basically that has now driven more work, and it's become more of a priority because that awareness has then basically spoken to the senior team, and they've said, you know, this is more important now more than ever, and we always knew it was important, but now we're seeing things we've never seen before. Does that, I'm not sure if that makes sense, but so it's not that they've reshaped their business priorities, it's that these things have become more important.
I think that's a good distinction. I mean, Sophie, I think, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Well, yes. I mean, I think Renee said some really powerful things, but also I'm looking at the chat and says people, so Kevin says they have a saying at their house, people are more important than things. And I think that really summarizes it so poignantly. It's beautiful. And it's absolutely true right now. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we heard from our clients and customers that we work with at Sounding Board has been, you know, COVID, we've had lots of crises, right? You know, we've had recessions in the past, and there's always up and down cycles to every business.
Right.
And what's been different about COVID, I think, is that it's something that has sort of disrupted life at the core for every person across the organization.
Yeah.
And I think having that is really one of the drivers that we're seeing around why leaders are now really recognizing how critical these sometimes, you know, previously thought of soft initiatives, right? Things that weren't core to the business. They're realizing the impact that that can have on their employee base and to the business ultimately. So that's really raised that level of importance and prioritization.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, you drive results. At the end of the day, business is business, right? You're looking for results, but you drive results through your people. Right. So if you think about that, really just let that settle in. It's how do you engage them to feel like they are a valued member of the organization, that you're supporting them so that they can drive the results for you. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's a lot of great things that Renee shared with regard to policies and things that you can put in place. That emotionally intelligent thing, that's really key right now. That's where I do most of my work, is with leaders around that. I mean, believe me, before COVID and all of the craziness of 2020 was absolutely necessary. Even now, it's like amplified to where it's front and center because the emotional toll and the mental health issues that are going on because we're in a virtual environment, they're real.
Yeah, actually, our last poll was around, you know, whether the folks on the call feel like their leaders have the skills and the leadership skills to move their company forward. The good news is that 60% of them do, so it's more than the majority.
Oh, that's good.
The other side
that
of
was wonderful.
Yeah, but 40% of them don't, which is still a significant part. And I think it relates a lot to what you were saying, that it's actually this connection through your leaders, through your managers, that has really emerged as a need. I'd love to know, Sophie, because you also get that very ground level view of some of the strategies that you are, teaching or coaching your clients to enact as leaders. Mm-hmm. What are some of those important leadership skills that you're seeing are really having that impact?
So first and foremost, and again, this differs for companies that are like startup to much more mature and everything in between. But at this time, I really have seen that we have to revisit the basics, the foundations of leadership. And what I mean by that is, are they having one-on-ones? Because guess what? When, crisis happens, when things are changing so rapidly, these kind of foundational things that we do, like touch bases, like one-on-ones, like team meetings, go by the wayside. And then they feel much more disconnected and they're not getting the communication that they need in terms of the team. And so I really work with leaders to, okay, let's figure out, do you have the foundational pieces in place? Are you meeting with them? Are you communicating that Renee said? Like, are you doing that even more so? Because they want to know, even if you don't know anything, that you don't know anything, right? And creating full transparency. So, making sure that that's there, and then really getting creative, that kind of what I call second tier. Then how are you engaging them even more? And I love what Daniel asked here, which is, do you think it's possible to over support your people? And I would say yes. Yes, and so you can over tilt that way, and it's kind of what Renee said in terms of like not being like so much like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, without taking action, right? So I tell my kids, you only get to complain about it 3 times, and then we got to do something about it, and or change your mindset. And so it's similar to leaders. Revisit it, and if you need to, visit it again, but then let's move on and help the employee move on in the best way possible. And by move on, I mean from the challenge and or situation, reframe it for them, give them additional support, and then the onus is on the employee after that. So that's kind of what I teach leaders as well. Is like, you can't keep putting in, the well of your self-care will be empty, and it is possible to over support. So you have to walk the fine line. So I really like that question.
Funny, I saw that same question and I thought the same thing. It is about direction. It is about setting boundaries as well. I mean, it is still a job. However, I'll add another piece to that as well. It's something that my CEO and I had insight to a few months ago, is that right now the stress at the macro level is so vast. It's so many things, as I shared earlier, that are compressing upon people. The socio-political environment is intense. The social justice movement is intense. Our health issue is intense. There's so many things that are happening. And so people are turning to their organizations to provide solutions and maybe have an element of control in a place, in a world that they feel out of control. And so, yes, I think that we can that we can go overboard in supporting, and I've seen it happen. And when that happens, you have a whole different layer and level of problems. But simultaneously, our employees now are looking to organizations for something more than organizations have ever needed to provide. And the way that I gauge this all now is people, the economic climate is poor. Joblessness is high, and it's hard to move from job to job at the moment. How we get through this, if people are retained after this is all over, we will know that we got through this well, and we provided what we needed to provide for our employees to be successful, and that they stay with us. We won't know any of this until all of this is over and people start to shop their resumes. And so in some ways, yes, you can over support, but also know that people are testing you as a company to see how you're navigating this, because when you navigate well during the hard times, you're certainly going to be phenomenal during the good times. And so they're gauging it. And I see it when I go on Glassdoor and I see other companies and things like that. So I think it's a real good balance between the things that you need to do and the things that you should do versus this is a company, this is your job, this is your paycheck, and finding that connection. And it goes back to what I said earlier today, which is know your company, know your people, know your mission. All companies are different, and our ethos are different, and we have to respond differently based on who we are and what our identity is.
I think the other interesting thing that we're seeing, you were talking about, the organization really has to be more than just the purveyor of work, right? People are really turning to their work as, almost a solution for everything across their lives. Yeah. A lot of press or just news that I read about that, they pontificate about, whether that has to do with just the incredible turmoil that's happening in our nation at the very highest leadership levels and where people are really seeking that support. I'd love to hear, Renee, just one more question on that, which is, have you had any, it sounds like your CEO has been incredibly forward thinking, and that's often, one we've seen as a really powerful catalyst for being able to create these types of organizations. That may not necessarily be the case for every organization out there. And so I'd love to hear a little bit on your thoughts for if there are folks out there that may not have that same level of support or alignment at the executive leadership levels, how do they think about pushing forward on the needs for their employees and balancing that against, other executive viewpoints?
In my past world, so I have a millennial CEO who is authentic, genuine, and cares a lot about people, but also cares about results. So I'm very lucky there. But in my past world, where I needed to move the needle on things like this, not as magnified as COVID, but other things where we needed to drive initiatives that they couldn't see the value. The thing that I always say is data, data, data. So if you can figure out a way to bring analytics to the equation, because generally I've seen that the people that are truly analytical are the ones that kind of push away some of the more, what they see as the people function or the HR function is touchy-feely. So how do we then influence? And the best way to influence is through data. And so that's why we do our surveys. That's why we're looking at analytics of what other companies are doing. And so we're out there really benchmark data from various sources that we can get so that we can bring that element home, because not my entire senior team is not my CEO. So it is also influencing them as well. And I've been able to move the needle on things that have been challenging through that methodology, and also at other companies as well.
Yeah.
So, any thoughts?
I think Renee captured it really nicely, and sorry, I'm kind of captivated by the questions that are coming in.
I know. We actually are going to move into Q&A shortly, but before we do that, maybe we can just wrap up with some final thoughts from both of you. I love the different perspectives that you both bring, and so Sohi, maybe I'd start with you. What are some final thoughts you'd love to leave the audience with?
Yeah, so, for the people that are on this, I would say really think about not moving away from the balance thing to integrating the priorities, right? Because that looks very different day to day than trying to balance everything. So really think about that, and really invest in your leaders right now to help people feel engaged and to help them manage their teams through this crisis. We need to shore up our leaders in a way that we've never seen before. So develop them, keep tabs on them, and then they will do the work to engage their employees.
Great. Over to you, Renee. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the HR and people professionals in this one. First off, we're doing a lot of really hard work that we've never seen before. We're on a journey that can be depleting if we get to that space. So what I'm going to share with my colleagues is to ensure that you're rejuvenating, that you're stepping away, because we are the caretakers of the company in many ways, taking in a lot of energy. And I think it's really important. And in that, it helps you to take care of your team. And so I think I have some team members on this call, so I want to say thank you. So all the things that I'm talking about, they're coming to life because of my team doing extremely hard work and through their commitment, getting these things pushed over the line. So I want to thank those members on my team, but also remind all people leaders to ensure that your team is getting what they need in a different kind of way than anybody else because of what they're doing. And the people function, HR function can be very tiring in this moment in time. So how do you help your folks build their resiliency at this moment? And I think that's really important. And so that's what I would end on, is let's focus on ourselves a little bit to be able to bring the great work forward to the organization, because we can only do it when we're taking care of ourselves.
Well, that's a beautiful parting thought. We certainly believe that as well at Sounding Board. Actually, one of the participants talked about this idea of putting your own oxygen mask on first, right? And we've certainly used that analogy in the past. It's actually really related to his question, which is, Kevin asked about just the fact that the level of overwhelm is so real right now for people leaders, for executives, for the employees. And, they've offered coaching, which me and Sohi are excited to hear, and also mental health tips to their teams. But do you have any other creative ideas that, they can enact to support their teams?
Are you asking me or Sohi?
Both.
Okay. So I would say, yes. So we need to look at our employees as whole people. And that burnout comes from steady the steadiness of overdoing it day after day. So first off, it's setting priorities, which so he said at the beginning, but some of the things that we're doing is we're looking at health and wellness overall. So we're in the process right now of designing a wellness week for our employees. And that will be inclusive of a mindfulness seminar, physical fitness, things that you need to do to take care of yourself. We'll be also looking at diet, and we'll have a chef maybe come in and do a live cooking demonstration and helping people. So we're going to have a week of these kinds of activities in order. So again, the mental health is one piece, and so we are working on the mental health piece. We are putting out information. We're working with our providers to find out what our benefits are, digging around because we have more benefits than we knew, and we're advising everybody, and we're trying to support them as best as we can. But the physical wellness is also something our organization is looking for. We've done a step challenge. We're involved in I believe the JP Morgan challenge. So we're doing these things that enable people to have something that's not just the work, but also comes from work that provides them some groundedness. We did find that we tried to do Zoom parties, Zoom happy hours, Zoom bingo, Zoom trivia. I'm sure you've heard this from everybody. And it was good for when we thought this was going to last for a couple of weeks, but we've kind of phased most of those out.
Yeah.
That was about community. The other thing that we haven't tried yet, and I don't know if people are aware of this on the call, but I learned about it in another seminar recently, is a company called Donut. Donut.com. You're shaking your head. I am really excited to explore this. It's another way to connect people, and it integrates through Slack. And it really is something else that I'd like to try. Again, looking at people wholly, we can't understand what motivates people. And so some people it's going to be health and wellness, some people it's going to be mental health, some people it's going to be connectivity. So again, look at it from a holistic standpoint as you're putting your pieces together.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that to say, looking at, if you were drawing a diagram of all the pieces in which, that makes us whole, mental, spiritual, emotional, all of that, I would simply ask your employees, what is it that's needed right now, and see what bubbles up as a theme and try to take action on that. And I think there's nothing more powerful than, whether it's a survey or you're reaching out as a leader to your team to say, should we participate in, are you interested in doing a cooking or a demonstration? Would you like to have us bring in somebody that can talk about mental health, whatever that looks like? But there's, it's powerful when you reach out to them, they provide you feedback, and you're like, great, that's what we're going to do, because a lot of people share the same sentiment. So I think that's where you really can make an impact, is to find out what's needed from the employees.
Sometimes it's as simple as asking, right?
Yeah.
Oliver, who is asking about Donut, we know them, Renee, because we share investors at Sounding Board. So it's Donut, just like the food, right? And it's a tool, I think, to be able to sort of connect remotely with your colleagues in a different way. And it's supported through Slack.
Yeah, it creates virtual onboarding buddies if you want to go that path, or lunch buddies, or again, don't know how to use it yet. I don't know if you do, Christine, but it's got so many great things to help keep the organization connected.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've done actually internally at Sounding Board is, we started out actually as a remote company, moved into having an office, and then during COVID decided to let go of our office. But because of that, we actually always operated as a remote first company. One of the things that's been really powerful for us is we always set up a weekly all hands with the entire company, where the focus is not just business. We spend the time at the beginning of the meeting. We have what we call a connection exercise. And really it's driven by one of the employees. It often is as simple as a question that elicits, some dialogue and some conversation about your colleagues, so you can learn about them in different ways. And we found that sometimes these really simple practices that you really work into your meetings or into the way that you are just sort of holding and doing business right within your corporate environment are the things that we found we've heard resonate the most with our employees, just being able to find that time to connect.
Christine, can I piggyback on that for a minute?
Yeah.
One of the things that we do with my HR team, and I love this connection exercise you're speaking of, and I may steal the practice. But what we do a 2 days a week we do a 30-minute sync, and the 30-minute sync isn't about business at all, like what you're saying. It's really to do a check-in on how we are as humans. And so we do a mood elevator. Where are you 1 to 10 on the mood elevator? No judgment. We laugh, we cry with each other, and then we say highs and lows. And so it can. I think it keeps the team really bonded because we see each other as whole rather than just as the manager that's doing this or the talent acquisition person that's doing that or whatever. We are, and it makes us a better team. So I would agree with you, and I would encourage people to build those kinds of practices. We haven't expanded it to the organization, but seeing how it's worked over the past few months, it might be something that we should probably take out a little bit further.
Oh gosh, there's nothing more powerful than that. Such like a really fundamental tool and so simple to do and so powerful. I do it with my students when I teach on Thursdays as well. We always do a check-in.
That's great.
Yeah.
One other question we got was around peer coaching. Because connection across colleagues has been an area that's really emerged as a need. Tawny was curious whether folks are using peer coaching or how you think about that as another tool.
Yeah, so I have done, it's another word for peer coaching, but coaching circles. And it's a similar concept. You bring peers together, and there's so much synergy, and that word is used a lot, but energy that's created by, again, having your peers share experiences, but give each other feedback on ways that they can overcome challenges. Sometimes it's even more powerful than having an actual coach do that for them. So I think it's really powerful, and if done well, can really help teams and people come together in a really nice way.
Kevin, I see your, sorry, I see Kevin's comment about empty your bucket and fill your bucket, and it's a delightful exercises too. To bring that to the workplace would be fabulous. There's a good book around that, I believe, a children's book.
I think there's a lot we can learn from our children, and also even the practices of educating children. So learning.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just saw that,
Oh,
and I remember that book from when my daughter was little, and I loved that book.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add on to Sohi, which is, I think your point on peer coaching, if done effectively, is important. Because one of the things, so we launched what we call Leadership Labs during COVID, which is effectively a group coaching experience, but it's facilitated by a coach. And the reason that I wanted to bring that point up is when you have this really high level of emotion in an organization, it is important to get your employees together to be able to connect with each other. But having that facilitation to ensure that, that energy and that emotion starts to move in a direction that moves the organization forward, that moves those leaders forward, is also really important, right? And I think, that's where a coach, someone like Sohi, can be really powerful, because you can allow people to share that, but then also help them start to translate that into action. Any thoughts on that, Sohi?
Yes, because if it's not processed, to your point, Christine, it gets stuck. And that can do a little bit more damage than the original start for why the group came together. So you do want to put in processes and have somebody help facilitate the process along in order for people to get to a place where they feel like they've processed it and they have some solutions coming out of it. Absolutely.
Well, go ahead.
So I love this idea, by the way. And again, another thing that I can take back home as well. We were looking at doing this for working parents, creating working parent groups. So what I'd like to do is extrapolate that a bit and say that I think you can take this kind of forum base that you're creating and do it for various things. Because another one that we've been looking at and talking about, again, we're still brainstorming some things, which is potentially self-care forums and or parent forums. So it's, again, because they're learning from each other, like we are here today, best practices, and trying to help solve the problems together.
Oh, the parent forums will be so powerful too.
Yeah. Yep. We're still brainstorming. We haven't done it yet. It's still on our list, and it's something that we think could be really fundamental to help our parents know that they're not alone. And I think that's the other important thing is sometimes we forget.
Yeah.
Well, if you would believe it, we are at the end of our time. I felt like that went super fast, and we still probably had another hour we could spend on this. But I just wanted to really thank both of you for your time today. I certainly learned a lot, and we had an incredibly engaged audience that really seemed to resonate and appreciate the strategies that you shared. One last thing as we wrap up is Sohi has generously offered to provide a signed book for folks that sign on and learn more about Sounding Board and some solutions that we provide that may be helpful for you as you think about how to support your employees. And so if you go to soundingboardinc.com and you sign up to learn more, you will also get a copy of her signed book. And it looks like we already have somebody asking for part 2. So we will definitely hold on that thought and come back to all of you. But thank you, Renee and Sophie, again. It was such a pleasure to spend this hour with you.
Oh,
Hi,
thank
back
you.
at you.
Nice
Thank
to
you
meet
so much. It's a pleasure.
This was
Okay.
fun. Thank you.
Be well,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.